Have you ever wondered what would happen if the internet just disappeared? All our digital libraries, our articles, our videos, everything we've ever known, just gone in a flash. It sounds like a sci-fi nightmare, right? But something very similar actually happened in history. After the fall of the mighty Roman Empire, Europe was plunged into what we call the Dark Ages. Cities crumbled, trade routes vanished, and with them the vast libraries of knowledge that had been the bedrock of civilization. It was a time of immense loss, where the wisdom of ancient Greece and Rome philosophy, science, literature, was on the brink of being lost forever. But it wasn't. In a world of chaos and conflict, tiny sparks of light flickered in the most unexpected of places. Monasteries. These were quiet, isolated communities, often perched on windswept hills or nestled in secluded valleys, and inside them lived the unlikely heroes of our story, the monks, while the world outside was consumed by survival. These men dedicated their lives to a task that seemed almost pointless at the time: copying books. Let's step back and picture this. There were no printing presses, no photocopiers, no Control-C, Control-V. Every single book had to be copied by hand, letter by painstaking letter. The place where this magic happened was called the scriptorium. Imagine a quiet room, maybe a little chilly, filled with rows of wooden desks. The only sounds are the gentle scratching of a quill on parchment, the soft turning of a page, and perhaps the distant chime of a monastery bell. The monks who worked here were called scribes. This wasn't a job for just anyone. It required incredible patience, a steady hand, and years of training. First, they had to prepare their materials. Parchment was made from animal skin, usually sheep or calf, which had to be scraped, stretched, and smoothed until it was ready to hold ink. The ink itself was often made from things like soot, oak, galls, or crushed minerals, mixed with a binder like gum, Arabic, and their pens. They were typically goose feathers, carefully cut and sharpened to a fine point. With their tools ready, the scribe would sit for hours on end, hunched over a manuscript. Their job was to create an exact replica of an existing book. This meant copying not just the words, but often the intricate illustrations and decorations that adorned the pages. These weren't just simple doodles. They were elaborate works of art, known as illuminations. Think of vibrant, colorful initials kicking off a chapter, or detailed miniature paintings depicting biblical scenes or nature, often decorated with real gold leaf that would catch the light and make the page literally glow or illuminate. This process was incredibly slow and physically demanding. A single scribe might spend months or even years completing just one book. They worked in silence, often for 6 or 7 hours a day. It was grueling on the eyes, the back, and the hands. Medieval records are filled with notes from tired scribes, scribbled in the margins of their manuscripts. One famous note reads, "The work is finished. May the scribe be given a good drink." Another one says, As the sailor longs for port, so the scribe longs for the final line. It's a human touch that reminds us. These weren't faceless drones. They were real people doing incredibly difficult work. So, what were they copying? It wasn't just the Bible, although that was certainly a major focus. They preserved a staggering range of texts. They copied the philosophical works of Plato and Aristotle, the epic poems of Homer and Virgil, the histories of Herodotus, and the scientific and medical texts of scholars like Galen. Without these monks, the foundational ideas of Western civilization, the very thoughts that would later fuel the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, could have easily vanished. They were building a bridge of knowledge, connecting the ancient world to the future. One of the most famous examples comes from Ireland. While mainland Europe was in turmoil, Irish monasteries became crucial centers of learning. Monks like Saint Columba founded monasteries, such as the famous one on the island of Iona, that became beacons of scholarship. They not only preserved classical and Christian texts, but also developed their own unique and beautiful style of art and calligraphy, which you can see in masterpieces like the Book of Kells. These Irish monks then traveled back to mainland Europe as missionaries, refounding monasteries and reintroducing the very texts that had been lost. They were like a cultural rescue mission. But why did they do it? What motivated them to spend their entire lives in this quiet, repetitive labor? For them, it was an act of worship. The Latin phrase they lived by was ora et labora, which means pray and work. Copying sacred texts was a form of prayer, a way to honor God through diligent work. They believed that by preserving these words, they were preserving divine truth and human wisdom for future generations. They saw it as their sacred duty to keep the flame of knowledge alive, even when the world around them seemed determined to extinguish it. Their work wasn't without peril. Monasteries were often targets for raids. Viking invaders, for example, would plunder them for their treasures, and books, often bound with precious metals and jewels, were valuable loot. Many precious manuscripts were burned or destroyed in these attacks. The monks who protected them were sometimes killed, defending their libraries. This makes their dedication even more profound. They weren't just scribes. They were guardians, willing to risk everything for the sake of knowledge. Think about the sheer impact of their work. Without them, the Renaissance might never have happened. The rediscovery of classical texts in the 14th and 15th centuries, which sparked a revolution in art, science, and politics, was only possible because those texts existed to be rediscovered. They had been sitting on monastery shelves, patiently waiting for centuries, copied and recopied by generations of anonymous monks. When Johannes Gutenberg invented the printing press in the 1440s, the era of the scribe slowly began to fade. Suddenly, books could be produced faster and cheaper than ever before. But the printing press didn't just appear out of a vacuum. It had something to print asterisks because asterisks of the monks. The first book Gutenberg printed was the Bible, a text that had been meticulously preserved by hand for over 1,000 years. The scribes had passed the torch. Today, we live in a world overflowing with information. Knowledge is just a click away. It's so easy to take it for granted. But our modern world of information stands on the shoulders of these quiet, dedicated individuals. They were the original hard drives of civilization. They were the archivists of the ancient world. In their silent scriptoriums, with nothing more than a quill, ink, and a profound sense of purpose, they saved the words. They ensured that the conversation of humanity, stretching back thousands of years, would not be silenced. So the next time you open a book or search for something online, take a moment to remember the monks. Remember the centuries of quiet labor, the steady hands, and the unwavering belief that words matter, that ideas are worth preserving, and that even in the darkest of times, a single person with a pen can help save the world.